But what we're doing is we're getting our meaning from the text. That's what we're doing. I agree with you that we have to do that. I do it every year. But I'm doing it because the text tells me to.
And the Lord's redeeming our lives and taking us out of our Egypt.
Yeah, and by the way, you can make an application now. He's taking us through the flood as well. But that's not when it says it. What I'm saying is there's a literary meaning the author's trying to get. Let me finish up, then we can take some more questions about this. But as we talk about text versus event, how does an event become a text? The development from an event to a text. The historical event happens in time and space. Something happens, whether it's the passing through the Red Sea or through just anything that can happen in the Bible. It happens in time and space. Then there's a record of that event written down. And then, finally, a book that includes the record of the event. Okay. Let's, how do I make this? I have an idea.
I don't remember.
I know.
I'd have to come look.
I know.
Okay.
Here we go. Right. Okay, so let's draw a picture of Isaiah. He's got his beard, that's how we know he's a prophet. He's told to take Sha'ar Yeshuv, his son, with him to go meet the king at the upper pool of the conduit. Right?
Right.
That happened, didn't it?
Yeah.
We don't have that. But that did happen. An event happened. Then Isaiah goes home and he keeps his journal and he writes about this event so he can remember it later on. Right? Is that what we have? No.
In words.
No. He writes about it in words, obviously, but that happened. But this isn't what we have still. What we have is this, a book.
Which may or may not contain the exact same text as he wrote in his notes.
No. Exactly. Now we have a stylized interpretation of this event. Why do I say stylized? Here's what I mean. What? Yeah, he's using his own style. He's using some literary clues for us to understand stuff. Because, what does he offer Ahaz? The Lord, he says, make it as high as heaven and deep as Sheol. What is he offering him? Make it, choose a sign. And what does Ahaz do?
He doesn't.
What?
He doesn't.
He rejects it. So the Lord himself gives a sign. Now, just so you know about the structure of Isaiah. I mean, this is literary artistry. You've got the first 6 chapters. It's an introduction to the book, culminating in his call. Then you have a narrative, a story, about a king in trouble and a prophet coming to him and offering him a sign. Right? At a pool. and the king rejects it. Chapters 7 through 12. Then chapters 13 through 35, all oracles of judgment. Judgment, judgment, judgment. Now, most people don't pick up on this, but guess what happens after you've got a narrative, and then you have oracles. And then in chapter 36, lo and behold, another narrative about a king in trouble, Hezekiah, with an invading army. And Isaiah comes to him and offers him a sign. And he accepts it. And the Lord delivers him. And then what follows in chapters 40 through 66 are oracles of blessing. He has taken an event and he has put it into a text and written in such a way so that even in the very structure of the text, we are to pick up the idea of what God is saying to us. He is a literary artist. And if we spend all our time trying to recreate where it was that Isaiah was standing when he talked to King Ahaz, we're going to miss the point. Because the author has put it all into the text for us to read it. Am I shaking? This is a little shake. This shakes people up because we have not been taught to read the Bible this way.
Is that like the simplicity of it is you and I make a contract. How do they know it is by reading the testament of what we agreed to in the contract? Because you and I will always know what that contract
we agree to it. The contract even reminds us if we forget.
Right.
Exactly. But what I'm trying to get across is that biblical writers are wonderful artists.
Yeah.
And they're using literary strategies. Let me give you another example. I'll give you two other examples. One from the Bible and one from not. Here's the not from the Bible. I read the book Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose. Anyone ever read that? If you're interested in American history, it's a great little book. It's the story of Meriwether Lewis and Clark, Corps of Discovery. Now, was there a Corps of Discovery that really set out from St. Louis and went all the way to Washington?
Yes.
Yes, that event happened in time and space. Clark and Lewis were both commissioned to keep journals. And Clark did, and Lewis did mostly. But there are huge gaps in his journals. And but Clark kept one faith, and a couple of the corpsmen of the Corps of Discovery kept journals. Now, I wasn't at the original Lewis and Clark expedition, and when I read Stephen Ambrose's book, I didn't even read, I might have read a quote or two from those journals, but I didn't read those journals. When Stephen Ambrose wrote his book, he took information from the journals, he took information from the other journals, from the other guys, from other books that were written, and compiled it into a book in which he makes a case. And it's not sacred, but if I read his book, I understand what he is saying is that the reason there are gaps in Meriwether Lewis's journals, and the reason that at the end of his trip he couldn't get his journals prepared for publication, and that he ended up in a cabin someplace in the woods and blew his brains out, is because he suffered from bipolar disorder, and it wasn't recognized in the early 19th century. And that's what happened to one of the greatest military leaders that we had in our early country. Okay? A man of undaunted courage. Okay? Now, I'm reading a text. I don't have to recreate. I don't have to go walk on the Louisiana Purchase, the trail, the Lewis and Clark Trail. I don't have to see pictures of it to understand what the author is trying to communicate through those events and records. Now, why do I say this? Luke was not around Yeshua. But he got records of those events and interviews and documents, and he put it together and he communicates a message about the Messiah, the perfect man. Right? And so I don't have to go to Israel, though I love to go to Israel. Because I just need to read the text to understand it. Now, I think going to Israel turns that text from black and white to color, because I understand it in a more vivid way. But I can understand the Bible if I'm in Africa and never went to Israel. The Bible is easy to understand if I just read it. If I'm looking for what the author is trying to communicate. The reason why I'm trying to tell you this is it sets you free. That, one of the most frustrating things I had as a professor is that a lot of students think they need a PhD in ancient Near Eastern history or PhD in classics to understand the Bible. And you don't. You know what you need to understand the Bible? The ability to read. Isn't that cool? Now, even without words, the text communicates. Let's see. The Torah follows this pattern. When you read the Torah, both in the microstructure in the opening chapters and in the macrostructure of the whole book, it follows this pattern 4 times. A long narrative, a poem, and an epilogue to the poem, and then another long narrative, a poem, an epilogue. 4 times. That's it. If you start in Genesis and end in Deuteronomy, narrative, poem, epilogue. Narrative, poem, epilogue. Just give you the first one, Genesis 1 through 48, creation and the patriarchs. Then a huge poem by Jacob over the 12 sons, right? And then chapter 50, the death of Joseph, the epilogue, and saying, bring my bones back to Israel. And then you get another narrative, the narrative of the Exodus, followed by the Song of Moses, a poem, followed by the epilogue leading them to Sinai. Then you get the Sinai narrative, where laws are dropped in, and it goes through Numbers. And then you get the poem of the Balaam, 4 oracles written in poetic form over 2 chapters. Then you have a little epilogue leading them to the retelling of the law, the Deuteronomy retelling, which is the 4th narrative. And then you have chapters 32 and 33, which are poetic. And then the epilogue, 34, the death of Moses. Narrative, poem, epilogue. Now, what is your... You ever go to a Broadway show? Yeah, I was a kid. My parents went to see Fiddler on the Roof with Zero Mostel. They wouldn't take me. I'm still bitter. They said I was like 6 or 7. They said every time we take you to the movies, you cry in the middle and you want to go home. So they're not going to pay all that much money, they said, for tickets, and then have me cry in the middle that I wanted to go home. So they didn't take me, and I'm still bitter. So they brought me home the vinyl, 33 and a 3rd RPM record, which I played and played and played and learned all those songs.
Gave your age away.
Yeah, 50. So I listened to that record, and then a couple of years later, my parents decided I wasn't whining so much, they would let me go, and they took me to see Herschel Bernardi on Broadway.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah. So I went to see it, and I was so excited, and then it was so boring. Do you know why? I knew the songs. And the songs tell the story. You ever know that? You watch a play, you have a little narrative portion where the things happen, and then what does the song do? It sort of encapsulates what the narrative was up to that point. And then you have a little bit more narrative, and the song encapsulates. Right? The point of the song is to encapsulate the message. That's the point. The poem or the song here encapsulates the message. So when we're reading the Pentateuch, one of the most important features to get the overall message of the Pentateuch is to focus right there at the poem. Because it's going to encapsulate the point of the narrative. Now, here's the strange thing. Genesis 49:1. Jacob tells his sons that he's going to reveal to them what will occur at the end of days. And in Numbers 24, Balaam says this is what will happen to this people when? At the end of days. And Moses says in Deuteronomy 31, just before he gets into the poem, this is what will take place at the end of days. keeps using this phrase, end of days. And it's so funny because, Genesis, it starts with the seed in Genesis 3, and then the seed to Abraham and Isaac. They follow the seed, keep your eye on the seed, get to Genesis 49, and he tells us that seed, you remember Abraham was told your seed will be kings? And he says, by the way, Judah, your brothers will praise you. And there's going to be a lion that will come from you. You know that? Keep your eye on the seed. And then what's the poem encapsulate? The message of the seed. What my point is we know it's important, and then, of course, once we start reading the words, just the importance of it is just in the structure. But then we read the words, what do we discover? What's the important message of the Pentateuch? Torah. It's Mashiach. End of days. Messiah is coming to redeem us. And it's all in the poems. Well, it's not all in the poems. It's all in everything. But the poems encapsulate. So what I'm trying to say by this is, if you read the text, as a literary work, what you're going to find is great meaning in that text. Okay? Now, let me continue on. Okay, now, there are different tasks that interpreters and historians have. Here's the task of a historian. It's to recreate the event using all available sources. To recreate the event using all available sources. The task of an interpreter is to understanding the meaning of a given text. So, I use this story at Moody all the time. Moody's on LaSalle Street in Chicago. LaSalle in Chicago. So let's say a guy's walking out and he gets hit by a car and killed on LaSalle Street. And of course the local news stations say, film at 10, because we're in the Midwest. Here in New York or Pennsylvania, they'd say, film at 11. So they show the film, and WLS, Channel 7, they show and they say, it was raining and the car skidded. WMAQ, Channel 5, says that the pedestrian was blind and stepped out against the light. But WBBM, Channel 2, says that the driver was drunk. Now, if I'm a historian, what is my goal?
To compile it all.
Compile it all, find out if it was true, and put a holistic understanding of the event together. Right? Now, if I'm an interpreter, I watch WMAQ, WLS, WBBM. Each one has their own message. Right? And so, I lay them out, what's my goal?
Looking at the message that this station has.
The message each individual station
Third
is
station
presenting.
is making a point about drunk drivers.
Yeah, one's making a point about the weather. One's making a point about blind people. Being right. They're all. Now, what if one of those records? That's not true. But what if one of them was sacred? Was an inspired film? As an interpreter of sacred texts, would I care about? Let's say the one about the drunk driver one. That was the inspired film. Would I care about the rain?
No.
Would I care about compiling? Does it make any difference that the guy may have been blind? No. I'm just going to say this is what this one. Now there may be other events or other factors, but to understand what God wants me to know, I'm going to look at this one. Now I'll give you the example here. There are many Sumerian flood records. There's the Gilgamesh epic. Many, many of them. Some people say you cannot understand Noah and the ark unless you understand Gilgamesh. Do I care about Gilgamesh? No. I mean, I'll tell you how I do care about it in a second, but to understand Genesis 6 through 8, what do I need to do?
Understand Genesis
6 through 8. That's all. That's it. Now, the value of the Gilgamesh epic and all the other Sumerian flood narratives and the Mari flood narratives, and the Hittite flood narratives, and the Phoenician flood narratives, and the Native American flood narratives is not to help me understand Genesis 6 through 8. What it does do is it says, there's all these flood narratives all over the world from ancient times, from time immemorial. They don't even remember where they came from. Makes you kind of think there might have been a worldwide flood. And what that does is it defends the integrity of Genesis 6 through 8. It is what we would call apologetics, defending the truth of the Bible. It is not interpreting the Bible. Do you see? Now, if I were teaching a course in apologetics, I'd spend all my time on that external stuff, proving that the events happened. And that's one of the reasons why I love going to Israel, because it's such a great apologetic tool. Because it comes to life. You say, yeah, this stuff really happened. Right?
Yeah.
But it's not for interpretation. Do you see what I mean? It doesn't help us interpret it. How do you interpret it? Reading it. Want to understand the Bible? Read it. Yes?
How do you discern whether something like, those who say that, like say the book of Revelation, they say that that's events that already happened when they're future.
Yeah.
So the people who apply something that's been historically fulfilled when it's yet to have prophetic fulfillment. So how would you explain that to someone that,
Yeah.
it's really, it hasn't, there's many other...
How do I deal with that? Well, it seems to me that if you read the text itself, first of all, the genre, apocalyptic literature, tends to be end days oriented. Secondly, it says it's a prediction of the end of days. And so it seems to me, when it talks about a prophecy of that which will come, it seems to me that it's best to read it as a futuristic book, particularly when there are events that are described that plainly have not happened, like the return of Messiah. Although those who don't want, there are some people who actually see, like in Matthew 24 and parts of Revelation, that Messiah returned in judgment on Israel. And so now God's done with Israel. It's just to justify their Messiah's return, and now that it's through with Israel, he's through with Israel. But I would say that, history does tell me. I'll give you an example, I think, of your question. Ezekiel talks about a worldwide regathering of the Jewish people, at which point they will all turn in faith to the Messiah.
What is your definition of all?
Well, they say all. He talks about the whole nation will turn in faith. The dry bones will live again, and the last step of that process is the breath of life being blown into them. Right? Most critical interpreters today say that was all fulfilled in 539, when Cyrus allowed the Jewish people to return. Well, history tells me that when Israel returned back then, they did not all, because I look at biblical history, they did not all turn in faith in Messiah. They did not experience the new covenant. They did not have circumcised hearts. And so therefore, I have to look, when did this happen? And so far, hasn't happened. It is yet future. So, but it's from reading the text that I get. The text tells me what to expect, and if it hasn't happened yet, it hasn't happened. Does that explain it to you? I think a lot of the stuff that people say about Revelation having happened, it's very arbitrary. Whatever we want it to be, it becomes. So, yes? I have to hear it.
What would you call the establishment of the nation of Israel the fulfillment of Ezekiel 37?
Partially, because everything's been fulfilled but the last step, the breath of life, hasn't happened yet. And I usually don't believe much in partial fulfillments, except that the way this text is written, it's written in stages. First the shake, rattle, and roll of the bones, and then they come together, and then they get sinews and flesh, and they stand upright, and the last step, the breath of life.
Right.
And so it seems to be that this is a prophecy that said it won't happen instantaneously, but in stages. And we're awaiting the last stage. And now we're getting a little taste of it at Messiah Conference. Okay, differing tasks of interpreters. Now, the implications of text versus event. The locus of revelation is in the text, not in the event, so therefore, we're not going to just try to figure out what really happened. We'll just accept that the Bible says it happened and figure out how the artist is trying to communicate it in the text. But it's good that, I'm glad you're here, Yochanan, because you get this idea of what an artist does. A little bit. It looks like your son does too. He's an artist too. You put a meaning into the art, right? So we're looking at the meaning of the artist of the text. Secondly, meaning is derived from the author's intent, not the understanding of the characters. Remember, just a couple examples of this. How many here think that Genesis 3:15 is a messianic prophecy? Good. Most of us do. To be honest, in the circles I run in, like if I go to the Evangelical Theological Society, or on the faculty of Moody, or I'm an adjunct faculty member at Dallas Seminary, I'd say the majority of these really fine interpreters would say it's not messianic. They follow Rashi about snakes and serpents, snakes and people. We want to stomp them, they want to bite us. That's what it's about. Yeah. That's the primary interpretation. Well, I was talking with one of these guys, and he says to me, well, I don't think Eve could have comprehended it. And I said, was Eve reading the Torah? Was Eve writing the Torah? Who are we asking? We're asking... That's the character. But who? When we want to get interpretation, understanding of meaning, we're asking what did the author and what could the readers understand? They don't care what the characters understood. Now, I actually think that Eve did understand. Maybe because God gave her more information that's not included in this text. But because later on, in chapter 4, she says, the Lord has given me another child, even the Lord. So I think something's going on. But it's not Eve's understanding. Another guy, trained by one of these really fine biblical scholars, I was at the Southern Baptist Convention. They asked me to teach on Messianic prophecy for a seminary class. They do a seminary class the week before the convention. So I went to the Southern Baptist Convention, I got my toupee on. And I would do that. But anyway, so I go there, and I teach on is the Hebrew Bible Messianic? And this guy who didn't believe it was, a Moody graduate, says to me, well, that's a very convincing argument. But you'll never convince me that Isaiah 7 is Messianic. I said, good news, that's my next lesson. So